After 70 years of life and 45 years of raising my children in that house, my son expected me to sleep among the garden tools and old paint cans. I clutched the deed to the property, feeling the weight of the decision I had made. A decision that would leave him standing on the sidewalk with nothing but a key to an empty house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You might wonder how a mother of 70 could be banished to the garage of her own home by her eldest son. The journey from beloved matriarch to unwanted inconvenience didn't happen overnight, though the final insult certainly felt like it could shatter my world in an instant. I've had countless hours to reflect on the moments I missed, the subtle changes I dismissed. Perhaps I was blinded by unconditional maternal love, or maybe I simply couldn't believe that my own child, the baby I'd rocked through countless colicky nights, the boy whose skinned knees I'd bandaged, the teenager I'd taught to drive in that very driveway, the young man whose college tuition I'd paid with money from selling my late husband's vintage car collection, would methodically erase my presence from the home I had maintained for nearly 5 decades. My name is Margaret Thornton. For 45 years after my husband Richard passed away when David was just 12, I've been the cornerstone of our family: mother, father, provider, counselor, and caretaker. We were an unbreakable team, my 3 children and I, against whatever challenges life threw our way. I worked days as a school librarian at Lincoln Elementary, checking out books and inspiring a love of reading in generations of children. My evenings were spent managing the books for 3 local businesses to make ends meet. Every spare moment was devoted to ensuring David, Susan, and Michael never felt the devastating void of a father's absence or the crushing limitations of a widow's modest income. I sacrificed willingly, passionately, because that's what love demands of a parent. I turned down every invitation to dinner, every potential romance, choosing instead to sit through endless baseball games where David pitched no-hitters, through Susan's ballet recitals where she danced with surprising grace, through Michael's science fairs where his inventions always seemed to malfunction at the last moment. I wore the same winter coat for 12 consecutive years, its cuffs fraying and buttons mismatched, so my children could have new ones each season. When college acceptance letters arrived, I didn't hesitate to take a second mortgage on our modest Maple Street home, postponing my own financial security to invest in their futures. Watching my children transform from awkward teenagers into confident, ambitious adults filled me with indescribable joy. David, my eldest, followed his father's footsteps into engineering, securing a position at Westfield Technologies right after graduation. Susan became a physical therapist, her natural empathy making her beloved by patients recovering from surgeries and accidents. Michael, my youngest, surprised us all by becoming a successful chef, his childhood kitchen experiments evolving into culinary artistry at a downtown restaurant. For years, Sunday dinners at my house remained sacred. No matter how busy their lives became, my children gathered around my oak dining table, the same table Richard and I had purchased as newlyweds, to share meals and stories. I'd spend all day preparing their favorites: pot roast for David, vegetable lasagna for Susan, and my special apple pie that Michael claimed no restaurant dessert could match. The changes began subtly, almost imperceptibly, when David married Elaine. She was beautiful in that polished, professional way, a marketing executive with perfectly manicured nails and a wardrobe that screamed success. Their courtship was a whirlwind of business conferences where they'd met, charity galas where they'd networked, and weekend getaways to destinations I'd only read about in magazines. "Mom, Elaine thinks we should have a destination wedding," David mentioned during one Sunday dinner. "Something intimate in the Bahamas." "The Bahamas?" I echoed, trying to mask my disappointment. I'd always imagined watching David marry in our local church where his father and I had exchanged vows 47 years earlier. Just immediate family, he continued, his eyes brightening with excitement. Elaine's parents are thrilled. They've already booked the resort. That sounds lovely. I managed, though my heart sank at the thought of my son marrying in a place I couldn't afford to visit. Will Susan and Michael be able to attend? David hesitated. Well, that's the thing, Mom. The resort is pretty exclusive. We're limited on guest numbers. In the end, I watched my eldest son marry via a choppy video call that Susan set up on her laptop. The Caribbean sunshine made the screen difficult to see, and the sound cut out during their vows. But I clapped and cheered anyway, my eyes fixed on the tiny figure of my son in a white linen suit, standing beside a bride I barely knew. After the wedding, Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly events. David was always busy with work trips, networking opportunities, or renovations on the 4-bedroom colonial they'd purchased in Hillcrest Estates, the affluent neighborhood across town where doctors, lawyers, and executives built homes with professional landscaping and 3-car garages. When they announced Elaine's pregnancy, I was overjoyed. A grandchild. I immediately began knitting blankets, researching the safest cribs, and setting aside a small savings account for the baby's future education. Mom, we've been meaning to talk to you, David said during one of his increasingly rare visits. Elaine's parents have offered to pay for the nursery design. They've hired an interior specialist from New York. That's generous of them, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. I'd spent weeks sketching ideas for a cozy nursery with a reading nook where I could rock my grandchild to sleep. I've been working on some blankets and a mobile. About that, David shifted uncomfortably. Elaine is very particular about the nursery aesthetic. Everything needs to coordinate with the designer's vision. But maybe you could make something. For here? For when the baby visits? I nodded, swallowing hard. Of course, dear. Whatever makes Elaine happy. Little Emma was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. I waited anxiously by the phone, having been told that the delivery room would only accommodate Elaine's parents. When the call finally came, David sounded exhausted but happy. She's perfect, Mom. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They're both resting now. When can I meet her? I asked, already reaching for my car keys. Maybe this weekend? Elaine needs to recover, and her mother is staying with us for the first few days to help. The weekend became the following week, then stretched to 2 weeks before I was finally invited to meet my granddaughter. When I arrived, carrying a small stuffed bear I'd sewn myself and a casserole for the new parents, Elaine's mother answered. The door. Margaret, come in, she said with practiced politeness. They're in the living room. Please use the hand sanitizer first. Doctor's orders. Emma was indeed perfect. Tiny fingers, rosebud lips, and a wisp of dark hair like her father's. When David carefully placed her in my arms, I felt that familiar surge of love that had overwhelmed me when I'd first held him 42 years earlier. She has your eyes, I whispered, watching as Emma's tiny hand curled around my finger. Actually, she has Elaine's mother's eyes, corrected Elaine from the sofa, where she sat scrolling through her phone. Everyone at the hospital commented on it. As the months passed, my visits to see Emma became exercises in restraint. Elaine had strict rules about feeding schedules, acceptable toys, and even how to speak to the baby. Full sentences only, no baby talk. My suggestions based on raising 3 children were met with polite but dismissive references to parenting books and pediatrician recommendations. Then came the job offer that changed everything. David was promoted to senior engineer, but the position required relocation to their company's headquarters in Boston, 300 miles away. It's an incredible opportunity, Mom, he explained over the phone. The salary is double what I'm making now, plus stock options and an executive benefits package. That's wonderful, I said automatically, though my heart was already calculating the distance, the cost of travel, the birthdays and holidays I would miss. When would you move? That's why I'm calling. The company needs me to start next month, and we found the perfect house in Brookline. The thing is, he paused, we need to sell our house here quickly. The market's hot right now, and our realtor says we could get top dollar if we list immediately. I'm sure you'll find a buyer right away, I assured him, trying to sound supportive. Actually, Mom, we were thinking, what if you bought our house? You're always saying your place is too big for just you now that we're all gone. Our house is newer, has better security, and it's in a great neighborhood. The suggestion caught me off guard. My modest home on Maple Street had been my sanctuary for 45 years. It held Richard's memory in every corner, the height marks of growing children on the kitchen doorframe, the garden he'd designed, the workshop where he'd taught David to build his first birdhouse. I don't think I could afford Hillcrest Estates, I said carefully, and I love my home. We'd give you a family discount, David pressed. And think about it, you'd be maintaining the house for us. If we ever moved back, we wouldn't have to buy new. The conversation ended with my promise to consider it, but I had no intention of leaving my home. Still, something in David's tone troubled me, a sense that he'd already set plans in motion. A week later, he and Elaine appeared on my doorstep unannounced. They sat at my kitchen table, spreadsheets and documents spread before them. Mom, we've run the numbers, David began without preamble. If you sell this house, which frankly needs a lot of work, and add your savings, you could buy our place with a very small mortgage. We've already spoken to our bank. You spoke to a bank about my finances? I asked, stunned. Just preliminarily, Elaine interjected smoothly. We're trying to help Margaret. This neighborhood is declining in value, while Hillcrest continues to appreciate. It's a sound investment for your retirement. I looked around my beloved kitchen, at the worn countertops Richard had installed, the window box where I grew herbs, the sunlight that streamed across the breakfast nook at exactly the right angle each morning. This is my home, I said simply. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not interested in moving. David's expression hardened slightly. Mom, be practical. This house is falling apart. The roof needs replacing, the furnace is ancient, and those stairs will become impossible for you in a few years. We're worried about you. I'm only 70, David, not 90. I can manage stairs just fine. The discussion grew increasingly tense, with David pointing out every flaw in my home while emphasizing the prestige and convenience of Hillcrest Estates. When I remained firm in my refusal, he abruptly changed tactics. What if we bought your house instead? As an investment property. You could stay here until you're ready to move into something more appropriate for your age. The phrase, more appropriate for your age, stung more than I let show. Behind his words, I heard the unspoken truth. My son saw me as declining, diminishing, becoming less, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I'm not selling my home, I stated firmly. And I'm not buying yours. You'll find a buyer quickly in this market. They left shortly after, David frustrated, and Elaine coldly polite. As their car disappeared down the street, I felt the first fracture in what I'd always believed was an unbreakable bond with my firstborn. The Boston move proceeded as planned. Emma, now walking and babbling her first words, was whisked away before I could establish the grandmother relationship I'd dreamed of. Video calls were scheduled, then canceled, rescheduled and cut short. Promised visits never materialized. Then, 6 months after they'd relocated, I received a surprising call from David. Mom, great news. I've been transferred back to the regional office temporarily. A special project needs my expertise for about 3 months. That's wonderful. Will Elaine and Emma come too? I asked, already mentally preparing the spare bedroom and dusting off children's books for Emma. Actually, they'll stay in Boston. The schools are better there, and Elaine has joined some important committees she can't leave. But I was hoping... He paused. I was hoping I could stay with you. Hotels for 3 months would be expensive, and it would give us time together. Joy surged through me at the prospect of having my son home again. Of course, I'll get your old room ready right away. The first week of David's stay rekindled something of our old relationship. We ate breakfast together, catching up on family news. He seemed genuinely interested in my library work and asked about old neighbors. I prepared his favorite meals, relishing the opportunity to care for my child again, even if that child was now a 42-year-old executive. But as the second week began, subtle changes appeared. David worked late most evenings, arriving home only to retreat to his room with a brief greeting. He began leaving messes in the kitchen, his bathroom, the living room. Small discourtesies that accumulated like snowflakes before an avalanche. "The water pressure in this shower is terrible," he complained one morning. "And the Wi-Fi keeps dropping. How can you live like this?" By the third week, he'd invited colleagues to the house without warning me, leaving me to hastily prepare refreshments. For strangers who eyed my modest home with barely concealed judgment, he rearranged furniture without asking, disposed of kitchen items he deemed outdated, and once I found him sorting through my financial documents that I kept in the desk drawer. "Just trying to help organize things," he explained when I questioned. "Mom, have you considered meeting with my financial advisor? I'm concerned about your retirement planning." The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon in early March. I had invited Susan and Michael for dinner, hoping to reunite my children around our family table. Susan brought her new boyfriend, and Michael arrived with a spectacular dessert he'd created himself. For a few precious hours, laughter filled my home again. After dinner, while I was in the kitchen making coffee, I overheard David speaking to his siblings in low tones. "We need to talk about Mom," he was saying. "She can't manage this house much longer. The repair bills alone will eat through her savings in no time." "She seems fine to me," Michael responded. "Mom's always been independent." "That's the problem," David insisted. "She doesn't realize how things are deteriorating, including her ability to maintain everything. I'm worried about her falling on those stairs or the roof leaking or the furnace, giving out in winter." "What are you suggesting?" Susan asked cautiously. "I think we need to consider assisted living options. There's a nice facility near my office in Boston. I've already gotten some information." I stepped into the dining room then, coffee pot in hand, my heart pounding. "I don't recall asking for your help with my living arrangements, David." The conversation halted abruptly. Susan looked embarrassed. Michael uncomfortable. David barely missed a beat. "Mom, we were just discussing options. You have to admit this house is becoming too much for you." "This house," I replied evenly, "is my home. I've maintained it quite well for 45 years, and I intend to continue doing so." The tension at the table was palpable. Susan quickly changed the subject, and Michael began serving his elaborately decorated cheesecake. But something fundamental had shifted, and we all felt it. After Susan and Michael left, David confronted me directly. "You're being unreasonable, Mom." "I'm trying to look out for your best interests." "By discussing putting me in a home behind my back?" I asked, the hurt evident in my voice. "An upscale retirement community," he corrected, "where you'd have proper care and social activities with people your own age." "I have friends. I have activities. I have a job I love, and a home I maintain perfectly well." He sighed with exaggerated patience. "Mom, you're 70. It's time to be practical about your limitations." "What limitations exactly?" "I work 30 hours a week, volunteer at the hospital on weekends, and just replanted the entire vegetable garden by myself." David paced the living room, frustration evident in every movement. "This isn't about your capabilities right now. It's about planning ahead. This house will become a financial drain and a physical burden. I'm trying to prevent a crisis before it happens." I studied my son's face, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed for, and saw something I'd been missing for years. He wasn't concerned about my welfare. He was concerned about the inconvenience my aging might cause him. My independence wasn't a source of pride for him, but a temporary condition that threatened his carefully ordered plans. "David," I said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but my living arrangements are not your decision to make." The argument escalated from there, with David listing every minor repair the house needed as evidence of my inability to cope. When I reminded him that I'd managed home maintenance while raising 3 children alone, he dismissed my experience as irrelevant in today's housing market. The next morning, David left early for work without saying goodbye. When he returned, that evening, he carried several glossy brochures from retirement communities and a folder of financial worksheets. "I've scheduled tours at 3 places next weekend," he announced, dropping the materials on the kitchen table. "The one in Boston is my top recommendation, but there are 2 local options if you insist on staying in this area." I didn't touch the brochures. "David, I've told you I'm not interested." "Mom, be reasonable. Your stubbornness isn't helping anyone." "My stubbornness," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call my desire to live in my own home?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily softened my anger. "Look, I know change is scary at your age, but trust me, these places are fantastic. Restaurant-quality dining, fitness classes, movie nights. You'll make friends with people in your demographic." "My demographic," I echoed. "You mean old people." "Senior citizens," he corrected with that same condescending patience. "It's not like you'd be sitting around playing bingo all day. These are luxury communities with engaged residents." I looked at my son, trying to reconcile the man before me with the boy who'd once written me poetry on Mother's Day, who'd cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend broke his heart, who'd promised his dying father he'd always take care of me. "David," I said finally, "I need you to hear me clearly. I'm not moving to a retirement community. Not now, not next year, not until I decide it's necessary. This conversation is over." His expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mom. A costly one." The following week brought a new dimension to this painful dance. David began inviting real estate agents to walk through my home without my permission or knowledge. I returned from the library one afternoon to find a strange woman with a clipboard in my living room. "Mrs. Thornton? I'm Brenda from Summit Properties. Your son asked me to do a market evaluation of the house." I was speechless with shock, then incandescent with anger. When David returned that evening, I confronted him immediately. "How dare you invite strangers into my home to assess its value?" He had the grace to look momentarily abashed before his expression shifted to defensive. "I'm trying to show you the options, Mom. This house is worth more than you think, even with its challenges. That equity could provide for your care for many years." "My care," I repeated, as if I'm already incapable of caring for myself. The argument that followed was like none we'd ever had. David finally revealed his true concern, that my potential decline would become his responsibility, disrupting the life he'd built with Elaine and Emma. "Be practical, Mom. What happens when you can't manage the stairs anymore? When you need regular medical care? When this house becomes too much? Do you expect me to drop everything in Boston and rush back here?" "I have never asked you to drop everything for me," I replied, my voice shaking. "Not once in your entire life," he scoffed. "That's not how it works. You won't ask, but the responsibility will fall to me anyway. I'm trying to put a plan in place now, before it becomes an emergency." That night, I lay awake for hours, the weight of my son's words pressing on my chest like stones. The boy I'd raised had grown into a man who saw me as a burden, a problem, to be managed rather than a person to be loved. More painful still was the realization that he believed he was being kind, even generous, by attempting to control my future without my consent. The following morning, David announced he would be spending the weekend in Boston with his family. "Think about what I've said while I'm gone, Mom. These brochures have virtual tours of the apartments. Just look at them, please." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the glossy retirement community materials and allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, but body-racking sobs that came from the deepest part of me. I cried for the relationship I thought I had with my son, for the respect I believed I'd earned, for the independence that he seemed determined to strip away. When the tears finally subsided, I found myself staring at a photograph on my refrigerator, Richard. And me on our wedding day, young and radiant with possibility. "What would you do?" I whispered to his image. The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Richard standing firm against his own father, who had tried to dictate our housing choices when we were newlyweds. "It's our life," Richard had said. "We make our own decisions." Gradually, a plan began to form in my mind. Not a reaction born of hurt, but a deliberate choice to reclaim my agency. I spent the weekend making phone calls, reviewing documents, and coming to terms with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. When David returned Sunday evening, I was sitting in the living room with a single folder on the coffee table before me. "Did you look at the brochures?" he asked hopefully. "I did more than that," I replied, my voice steady. "I made a decision about my living situation." His face brightened. "That's great, Mom. Which community interested you most?" "None of them," I said, sliding the folder toward him. "I've decided to sell this house." "Finally!" Relief flooded his features. "That's exactly what I've been— and I'm not buying another one," I continued. "I've accepted a position as resident librarian at a literary retreat center in Arizona. It includes housing on the property, meals, and a modest salary to supplement my pension." David stared at me in confusion. "Arizona? Mom, that's ridiculous. What about family? What about Emma?" "Emma has seen me 3 times in her life, David. All your talk about family rings rather hollow given that reality. But what about the house?" he stammered. I opened the folder to reveal a contract. "It's already in process. I've accepted an offer from a lovely young couple expecting their first child. The closing is in 30 days. Without consulting— "Me?" His voice rose in disbelief. "After all the work I've put into trying to help you?" "The last time I checked, David, I don't need my son's permission to sell my own property." I kept my tone gentle but firm. "You've made it abundantly clear that you see me as a potential burden. I'm choosing not to be one." His expression cycled through shock, anger, and something like fear. "Where will you stay until you move to Arizona? You can't possibly pack up this entire house in a month. Susan has offered her guest room while I sort through what to keep. Michael is helping with the packing." "You told them before me?" Indignation colored his voice. "They asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I needed. There's a significant difference." The reality of what was happening finally seemed to penetrate. "Mom, you can't just leave. What if you hate Arizona? What if you need care? What if— Then I'll make another decision," I interrupted calmly. "Just as I've been doing successfully for the 45 years since your father died." The next few weeks unfolded in a blur of activity. David alternated between trying to talk me out of my decision and sulking when his arguments fell flat. He even enlisted Elaine to call me with concerns about the isolated desert location and lack of proper medical facilities near the retreat center, details she'd clearly invented, as the center was located near a major university town with excellent health care. As the closing date approached, David made one final attempt. "Mom, what if we bought this house as an investment property? You could stay here, and when it's no longer suitable, we'd already own it." I smiled sadly at his inability to say aloud what he meant. "When I died." "The contracts are signed, David. The new owners move in next month." On my final day in the house, I walked through each room, saying goodbye to the home that had sheltered my family through joy and grief. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the countertop where 3 children had eaten countless meals. In the living room, I remembered Christmas mornings and homework sessions. In the master bedroom, I whispered a final goodbye to the space where Richard and I had loved and dreamed and planned. David arrived as the last boxes were being loaded into the moving truck. He stood awkwardly in the empty living room, looking lost. "I still think you're making a mistake," he said, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." As we walked out the front door for the final time, I paused on the porch where I'd watched 3 children grow up, where I'd waved goodbye as they left for college, where I'd welcomed them home for holidays and celebrations. From my purse, I withdrew an envelope and handed it to David. "This is for you." He opened it to find a single key. "What's this?" he asked. "The house key," I replied. "Since you were so concerned about my living situation, I thought you might like to know how the story ends." His confusion was evident. "I don't understand." "The house is sold, David. I no longer live here. But you were right about one thing. I did need to make a change." I looked into the eyes of the boy I'd raised, the man who had forgotten how to see me. The change wasn't where I lived, but how I allowed myself to be treated. As I walked down the porch steps toward Susan's waiting car, David called after me, "Mom, wait! What am I supposed to do with this key?" I turned back one last time, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Nothing, David. There's nothing behind that door for you anymore." 6 months later, I'm sitting on the veranda of my casita at the Saguaro literary retreat, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The librarian position has given me purpose, community, and the respect I'd begun to believe was beyond my grasp at 70. Susan visits regularly, bringing news of Emma, who's now talking in complete sentences. Michael consulted on the retreat center's kitchen renovation and has begun dating one of the visiting authors. And David, he calls occasionally, his tone less certain, more questioning. Our relationship is different now, not severed but fundamentally changed by my refusal to be diminished. Yesterday, a package arrived from Boston. Inside was a framed photograph of Emma holding a book, with a note in David's handwriting. "She loves stories, just like her grandmother." It's a small step, perhaps, but relationships rebuilt after betrayal must begin somewhere. I placed the photograph on my desk in the library, next to the jade plant Susan gave me as a housewarming gift. "For resilience," she'd said. "It thrives in the desert." As I water that plant each morning, I reflect on how much I've learned at 70 about standing firm, about refusing to be invisible, about claiming the space I've earned through decades of loving service. The key I handed David unlocked nothing, but the truth that my worth isn't determined by my children's assessment of my capabilities, but by my own unshakable knowledge of who I am. And sometimes that knowledge is the most powerful key of all. The Saguaro Literary Retreat Center became my sanctuary in ways I never anticipated. Nestled at the foothills of the Catalina Mountains, the adobe buildings housed a collection of casitas for staff and visiting authors, a magnificent library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert landscape, and community spaces, where readers and writers gathered for workshops and discussions. My casita, a modest one-bedroom dwelling with terracotta tiles and a small veranda, felt more like home in 3 months than my house on Maple Street had in the final years. I arranged my carefully curated belongings. I'd donated or sold nearly 80% of my possessions, with deliberate attention. Richard's reading lamp beside the comfortable armchair, our wedding photo and the children's school portraits on the bookshelf. The hand-woven blanket Susan had brought back from her volunteer work in Guatemala draped across my bed. The transition wasn't without challenges. Arizona summers were nothing like the mild Midwestern heat I'd known, and my first experience with 110-degree temperatures left me gasping for breath and questioning my decision. Desert creatures, particularly the scorpion I found in my shower one morning, required adjustments to my daily routines. And there were nights when the profound silence of the desert made me acutely aware of my solitude, in a way the familiar sounds of my old neighborhood never had. But these challenges paled in comparison to the liberation I felt. As resident librarian, I managed the retreat's extensive collection, assisted visiting scholars with research, and organized weekly literary discussions that quickly became popular with both retreat residents and members of the nearby university community. My experience engaging children with books translated beautifully to helping adults rediscover the joy of reading and thoughtful conversation. Director Sofia Martinez, a formidable woman in her 60s who had founded the retreat after a distinguished academic career, became both mentor and friend. She had an uncanny ability to see through pretension and a refreshing directness I found comforting. "I was right about you," she remarked over coffee one morning, about 2 months after my arrival. "You're exactly what this place needed." "How so?" I asked, still uncertain of my place in this new world. "You bring something real to our discussions. These visiting writers, many of them live in abstractions. But you've lived, Margaret. Real love, real loss, real disappointment. It grounds. They're theoretical flights of fancy." I laughed, surprised by her assessment. "I'm not sure they'd appreciate being grounded by a 70-year-old librarian from the Midwest." "Oh, but they do," Sophia replied, her dark eyes twinkling. "Haven't you noticed how they linger after your book discussions? How they seek you out in the library? You're the authenticity they're trying to capture in their work." This perspective, that my ordinary life experiences might have value beyond my family circle, was revelatory. For decades, I'd defined myself primarily as mother, widow, provider. At the retreat, I was discovering facets of myself that had been dormant or entirely unexplored. I joined a watercolor class taught by a local artist, producing awkward but increasingly confident desert landscapes. I attended astronomy nights where a professor from the university guided us through the magnificent dark skies of the Southwest. I even tried yoga for the first time, laughing through my stiffness alongside women decades younger. "You're blooming," Susan observed during her first visit, 3 months after my relocation. "I haven't seen you this animated in years." We were sitting on my veranda, watching hummingbirds dart among the ocotillo blossoms while sipping iced tea. Susan had flown, in for a long weekend, eager to see my new life. "I suppose I am," I admitted, though I still have moments when I wonder if I've lost my mind, abandoning everything familiar at 70. "You didn't abandon everything," Susan corrected gently. "You brought what mattered and left behind what was draining you." She hesitated. "Including David's constant judgment." The mention of my eldest son brought a familiar twinge. We'd spoken only 3 times since my departure, brief, awkward conversations marked by careful politeness on both sides. He'd called when I first arrived, ostensibly to ensure I'd made the journey safely, though the underlying tension remained palpable. Our second conversation came after a minor health scare, a reaction to a medication that resolved quickly, that Susan had mentioned to him. The third was a strained birthday call, during which he'd informed me that they weren't planning any visits, given the expense of transcontinental flights. "He's still angry," I said, watching a roadrunner dart between the cacti beyond my small yard. Susan sighed. "He's confused. You deviated from his script. For as long as I can remember, David has needed to be the one in control, the one with the answers. When you refused to follow his plan, you challenged his entire self-conception." "As what? The all-knowing son?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "As the responsible one, the successful one, the one who would eventually take care of everyone." Susan shook her head. "He doesn't know how to relate to you as an independent person making your own choices. It conflicts with the future he'd mapped out, where he'd gradually take over managing your life as you became more dependent." The insight stung with its accuracy. And I ruined that script by refusing to become dependent. Exactly. Our conversation shifted to Susan's life, her physical therapy practice, her developing relationship with Mark, the biology professor she'd been dating for 6 months. But David remained a shadow presence in our weekend together, his absence more noticeable because of how comfortably Susan had adapted to my new circumstances. The contrast between my children's responses to my decision grew more pronounced when Michael visited the following month. Where Susan had been supportive but reserved, Michael embraced my new life with characteristic enthusiasm. "This place is incredible, Mom," he exclaimed, exploring my casita and the retreat grounds with childlike curiosity. "The light here, no. Wonder you've taken up painting. And the food. Have you tried that little Sonoran restaurant in town? I need to talk to their chef about that mole sauce." Michael, my youngest at 38, had always approached life with an adventurous spirit that contrasted sharply with David's cautious pragmatism. As a celebrated chef at Terroir, one of our hometown's most innovative restaurants, he understood reinvention better than most. "I'm renovating an Airstream trailer," he announced over dinner at the retreat's community kitchen, where he'd charmed the regular cook into letting him prepare a special meal. "Going to take a sabbatical next year, travel the country exploring regional cuisine. Maybe write a cookbook." "That sounds wonderful," I said, watching him plate roasted vegetables with the same careful attention he'd given to building block towers as a child. "Where will you start?" "Here, obviously." He grinned. "My mother, the desert librarian, makes an excellent first chapter, don't you think?" On his last evening, after most retreat residents had retired, Michael and I sat beside the outdoor fireplace under a canopy of stars. The conversation turned, inevitably, to David. "He's making Susan run interference," Michael admitted, poking at the embers with a stick. "Calls her weekly for updates on you. Never asks me directly, though he knows I visit." "Why not?" Michael shrugged. "Because I approved of your decision. That makes me complicit in his eyes." "You didn't just approve," I reminded him. "You helped me pack, drove the moving truck, set up my furniture. I couldn't have done this without you." "You would have found a way," he said with a gentle smile. "Once you made up your mind, you became unstoppable. It was magnificent to watch." We sat in companionable silence, the desert night wrapping around us like a cool blanket. The question that had been floating in my mind finally found voice. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" Michael considered this, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. "I think that depends on whether he can ever understand that there's nothing to forgive. You didn't betray him, Mom. You refused to surrender your autonomy. Those are very different things." After Michael's visit, life at the retreat settled into a pleasant rhythm. I expanded my library duties to include a memoir writing workshop for seniors at the community center in town. My watercolors improved enough that Sophia insisted on framing several for the retreat's annual art show. I made friends, real friends, not just acquaintances, including Eleanor, a retired anthropology professor who lived in the casita nearest mine, and James, a widower from Phoenix who participated in our monthly mystery book club. The memorial. Photograph of Richard remained on my nightstand, but I found myself speaking to it less frequently. Not because I missed him any less, but because I was gradually learning to carry his memory differently, as a treasured part of my history rather than the defining aspect of my present. 6 months stretched to 8, then 10. Autumn arrived, bringing mercifully cooler temperatures and preparations for the retreat's busiest season. My days filled with cataloging new acquisitions, coordinating the visiting author series, and planning holiday events for the retreat community. The rhythm of this new life felt increasingly natural, my decision to upend everything at 70 seeming less radical with each passing day. Then, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, a package arrived from Boston. The retreat's administrative assistant delivered it to the library, where I was organizing research materials for an upcoming workshop. "Special delivery for you, Margaret," she announced, placing a large, carefully wrapped box on my desk. "Came by overnight service." The sender's label showed David's address. My heart performed a complicated maneuver, part hope, part apprehension. We hadn't spoken since August, when he'd called on my birthday. What could possibly warrant overnight? Shipping? I opened the package cautiously, half expecting retirement community brochures or medical alert system pamphlets, David's way of continuing to question my independence despite the distance. Instead, I found tissue-wrapped bundles, each labeled in Emma's childish handwriting, for Grandma's Arizona Christmas tree. Beneath these lay a framed photograph of Emma sitting on Santa's lap, a gap-toothed smile revealing her recently lost front teeth. A note in Elaine's precise handwriting accompanied it. Emma insists her grandmother should have a holiday photo. We hope you're doing well. The ornaments, when unwrapped, revealed themselves as handmade creations, salt dough shaped into wobbly, stars and painted with excessive glitter, paper chains in bright colors, a pipe cleaner and bead candy cane, a child's Christmas crafts made with obvious enthusiasm if limited skill. At the bottom of the box lay a card in a sealed envelope. David's handwriting on the front, simply, "Mom." I sat with the envelope for several minutes, surrounded by Emma's cheerful creations, preparing myself for whatever tone the message might contain. When I finally opened it, the contents surprised me. "Mom, Emma asked about you yesterday. Why you weren't in any of her recent memories. Why we don't visit your house anymore. Why she couldn't remember what you looked like beyond photographs." Hard questions from a 5-year-old. I realized I didn't have good answers. Elaine suggested we help Emma create something for you, to make you more present in her life even from a distance. These ornaments are the result of her weekend project. She's enormously proud of them and made me promise you'd receive them in time to decorate for the holidays. I know our last conversations were difficult. I still don't fully understand your decision, but Emma's questions made me realize I've been extending our disagreement at the cost of her relationship with you. That's not right or fair to either of you. We're considering a trip to Arizona during Emma's spring break in March, if that would be welcome. David. No apology, no direct acknowledgement of his behavior, but a crack in the wall nonetheless, a recognition that something valuable was being lost in our estrangement. I called Susan immediately. "Did you know about this?" I asked after describing the package. "Not specifically," she admitted. "But David mentioned Emma had been asking about you. I think he's been showing her your birthday pictures from when Michael and I visited." "He wants to visit in March," I said, still processing this unexpected development, "with Elaine and Emma." "How do you feel about that?" I considered the question carefully. Cautiously optimistic. I miss Emma terribly, and even though David and I have significant unresolved issues, I don't want to lose my relationship with my granddaughter. "Then say yes," Susan advised, "but establish boundaries from the beginning. This is your home now, your life. They're welcome to visit, but not to judge or try to change things." After our call, I sat on my veranda watching the sunset paint the Catalinas in shades of pink and gold, Emma's handmade ornaments spread across my lap. The complex emotions they evoked, joy at her thoughtfulness, sorrow for the time lost, hope for a relationship that might still develop, reminded me how family connections persist even when strained, how love remains even when respect falters. Crafted my response carefully, thanking David for the package, expressing delight at Emma's creations, and welcoming their spring visit with genuine warmth. I enclosed photographs of my casita, the retreat's library, and the desert landscape, specifically addressed to Emma so she could begin picturing her grandmother's new home. My small artificial Christmas tree, when decorated with Emma's ornaments, became a conversation piece among retreat residents. I found myself sharing more of my family story with my new friends, the telling becoming easier with practice. The painful parts remained painful, but the perspective gained from distance and time allowed me to see the broader pattern. How David's controlling behavior had roots in his childhood, fear of loss after his father died, how his genuine concern had become warped into something that diminished rather than protected. As the holidays approached, I agreed to host a small dinner gathering at my casita for those remaining at the retreat over Christmas. Eleanor brought her famous pecan pie, James contributed an excellent Cabernet, and Sophia arrived with armfuls of native greenery to add a festive touch to my modest decorations. The evening was filled with stories, laughter, and a sense of chosen family that warmed my heart in unexpected ways. On Christmas morning, I received video calls from both Susan and Michael, their familiar faces and voices bridging the physical distance between us. David sent a formal family photo and a brief message wishing me happy holidays, while Emma contributed a crayon drawing of what appeared to be me riding a camel through a forest of cacti, her 5-year-old imagination clearly fuzzy on desert geography. The new year brought new projects. Sophia approached me about expanding my role at the retreat to include coordinating a literacy program for underserved communities in the area. The position came with a modest salary increase and the title of Community Outreach Director. "You've become an essential part of what makes the retreat work," Sophia explained when I expressed surprise at the offer. "Your ability to connect with people across generations, to make literature accessible without diminishing its complexity, those are rare gifts, Margaret." I accepted the position with a sense of astonishment at this unexpected career advancement. At 70, the expanded responsibilities energized rather than exhausted me, providing structure and purpose that I realized had been lacking in my final years on Maple Street. As March approached, bringing with it the promised visit from David, Elaine, and Emma, I found myself experiencing both anticipation and anxiety. Susan called regularly, offering support and strategies for maintaining boundaries. Michael promised to fly in for a day during their visit. Moral support, he called it, though we both knew his presence would help buffer any potential tension. Prepared for their arrival with perhaps excessive attention to detail. The pull-out sofa in my living room was arranged for David and Elaine, while the small reading nook would become Emma's sleeping space, complete with a canopy I'd constructed from colorful scarves. I stocked the refrigerator with foods I remembered David enjoying, added children's books to my shelves, and planned outings that would showcase the beauty of my new home. The retreat staff, aware of the significance of this visit, rallied around, me with touching solidarity. Eleanor baked cookies for Emma's arrival. James offered use of his Jeep for desert excursions. Sophia adjusted the library schedule to ensure I'd have uninterrupted family time. They arrived on a perfect spring afternoon, the desert in magnificent bloom after winter rains. I waited on the retreat's main patio, my stomach fluttering with nerves I hadn't experienced since my first day of college 52 years earlier. The rental car pulled into the gravel parking area, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Then the back door flew open and Emma erupted from the vehicle, a whirlwind of energy in purple leggings and a sparkly unicorn t-shirt. "Grandma! Grandma! We came on an airplane and I had a window seat and I saw clouds from the top," she hurled, herself into my arms with complete trust, as though our relationship had never been interrupted. Over her head, I watched David and Elaine approach more cautiously. He looked older somehow, though it had been less than a year since I'd seen him. More lines around his eyes, a slight stoop to his shoulders I didn't remember. Elaine remained immaculately put together, though her smile seemed less practiced, more genuine than I recalled. "Mom," David said simply, hesitating before stepping forward for an awkward embrace. "You look well." "The desert agrees with me," I replied, returning his hug briefly before welcoming Elaine. "Your home is lovely," she offered, glancing around. The retreat grounds with what appeared to be sincere appreciation. Much more vibrant than I imagined. Emma, already exploring the patio plantings with the dedicated focus only kindergartners can muster, called out, "Daddy said you live in a library. Can we see the books? Do you have unicorn stories? Can I check out books like at school?" Her enthusiasm broke the ice, giving us all permission to set aside uncomfortable history, at least temporarily, in service of her excitement. I led them on a tour of the retreat, introducing staff members, showing them the library where I worked, and finally bringing them to my casita. "It's small," I acknowledged as we entered the cozy space, "but perfect for me." David surveyed the living area, kitchen, and bedroom with an appraising eye I recognized all too well. I could almost hear the calculations running through his mind: square, footage, amenities, proximity to medical care, and braced myself for the critical assessment that had been his standard response to my choices. Instead, he surprised me. "You've made it completely yours," he said quietly. "I can feel your personality in every corner." The comment, so unexpected in its perception and acceptance, momentarily silenced me. Before I could respond, Emma discovered the reading nook I'd prepared for her, complete with twinkling fairy lights and a stuffed javelina I'd purchased from the local nature center. "Is this my room?" she gasped, diving into the pillows. "It's like a princess cave." The first evening unfolded more easily than I'd dared hope. We dined at the retreat's community kitchen, where the chef had prepared a special menu highlighting local ingredients. Emma charmed everyone she met, while David and Elaine engaged politely with my colleagues and friends. Later, as Emma fell asleep surrounded by the library books she'd insisted on borrowing, David and I sat on the veranda in the cool evening air, the conversation we'd been avoiding finally unavoidable. "This isn't what I pictured," he admitted, gesturing toward the retreat grounds illuminated by soft pathway lights. "When you said you were moving to a literary retreat in Arizona, I imagined something austere, isolated. You imagined what supported your narrative that I was making a reckless decision," I corrected gently. He didn't deny it. "I was wrong about this place, about what it could offer you." The admission, limited as it was, represented significant movement from my usually unyielding son. I accepted it as the olive branch it was intended to be. "Why did you really push so hard for me to move to that retirement community?" I asked, the question that had lingered since our painful arguments nearly a year ago. David was silent for a long moment, his profile silhouetted against the desert night. "I told myself it was about your safety, your future. But looking back, I think I wanted you settled somewhere I controlled, where I could make decisions without opposition, where I felt needed but not inconvenienced." The honesty was startling. "That's quite an insight. Therapy," he said with a rueful smile. "Elaine insisted, after you left, said I was controlling her the same way I tried to control you. Said she wouldn't raise Emma with that example." This revelation, that my stand had catalyzed changes beyond my own life, left me momentarily speechless. As the silence stretched between us, comfortable in a way I hadn't expected, I realized we were experiencing a reset of sorts, not erasing the past year's pain, but acknowledging it as part of a longer story still unfolding. The visit continued, for 5 days, each bringing small moments of reconnection. Emma and I baked cookies in my tiny kitchen. David helped install shelves I'd purchased months earlier, but hadn't managed to mount properly. Elaine, whose professional reserve had always created distance between us, revealed a previously hidden interest in southwestern pottery, leading to an unexpectedly enjoyable afternoon at a local gallery. Michael's arrival for the final day added a dimension of completeness to the gathering. Watching my 3 children together, Susan having flown in as a surprise orchestrated by Michael, I felt a circle closing, a wound beginning to heal. As they prepared to depart, Emma presented me with a carefully folded piece of construction paper. Inside, she'd drawn our family. Stick figures labeled with wobbly letters: Daddy, Mommy, Emma, Uncle Michael, Aunt Susan, and Grandma. The last figure distinguished by an enormous smile and what appeared to be a stack of books balanced on her head. "So you don't forget us," she explained solemnly. "Daddy says you're making a new life, but you can keep us in it, right?" Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom adults struggle to articulate. "Of course I'm keeping you in my life," I assured her, kneeling to meet her earnest gaze. "Making a new life doesn't mean losing the people I love. It just means I'm adding new things too." As their rental car disappeared down the retreat driveway, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude for the beginning of reconciliation, lingering, sadness for the time lost, and most surprisingly, a complete absence of doubt about my decision. The Margaret who had stood on the porch of her Maple Street home and handed her son a key to an empty house had acted from a place of hurt and necessity. The Margaret who waved goodbye from her desert casita did so from a place of strength and certainty. 2 weeks after their visit, a thick envelope arrived from Boston, containing a formal letter from David's law firm. My heart sank, assuming he had reverted to his controlling patterns despite our seemingly positive reunion. But the contents surprised me again. The documents detailed a college savings account David had established for Emma, with me named as the secondary administrator. A note explained, "So you can be part of her educational future, regardless of geography or circumstances. We'll bring her to visit at least annually, but in the meantime, you should have a tangible connection to her growth." It wasn't an apology, in the traditional sense. David, I was learning, might never directly acknowledge the pain his behavior had caused. But it was recognition of my rightful place in Emma's life, and by extension, in his. As spring yielded to another Arizona summer, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at the retreat with a small gathering of my new friends. We sat under the ramada as the setting sun painted the mountains in spectacular color, sharing stories and laughter that confirmed what I'd gradually come to understand. Family comes in many forms, at many stages of life, and there is always room for expansion. Susan visits regularly, having discovered a passion for desert hiking. Michael's Airstream journey officially begins next month, with my casita serving as his first extended stop. David, Elaine, and Emma are scheduled to return for Thanksgiving, having decided that new traditions might serve us all better than clinging to old expectations. The house on Maple Street now belongs to a young couple expecting their second child. They sent a holiday card last year showing their toddler standing beside the height markings on the kitchen doorframe where I'd once measured David, Susan, and Michael. The continuation of that simple tradition in a home I loved brought unexpected peace. As for me, I recently signed a 2-year contract extending my position at the retreat. At 71, I'm experiencing the most professionally fulfilling period of my life, surrounded by intellectual engagement, meaningful work, and authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Sometimes, in the clear, desert evenings when the stars emerge with breathtaking clarity, I think about the key I handed David on that final day in my old life. It wasn't just a symbol of what he'd lost through his attempts to control me. It was also, though I didn't recognize it then, the opening of a door to what I might become when I refused to be diminished by others' expectations. Our darkest moments, those times when we feel most betrayed or dismissed by the people we've loved with our whole hearts, can become unexpected thresholds. The son who suggested his mother should sleep in the garage unwittingly gave her the push she needed to discover that the final chapters of her story could be the most surprising, the most affirming, and perhaps the most beautiful of all. And, for that, in my more generous moments, I find I can actually thank him. The summer heat had finally broken, giving way to the glorious Arizona autumn that makes the punishing summers worthwhile. I'd just celebrated my 72nd birthday with a small gathering at my casita, Eleanor bringing her famous tres leches cake, James playing guitar on the veranda, and Sophia presenting me with a beautiful handcrafted journal bound in tooled leather. "For the memoir you're going to write," she explained with characteristic directness, "your story needs to be shared beyond our little community." I laughed, running my fingers over the intricate patterns. Who would be interested in reading about an elderly librarian's rebellion? Everyone who's ever been underestimated because of their age, Eleanor interjected, which is essentially everyone over 65. The idea seemed absurd, yet I found myself drawn to the journal's blank pages. Over the following weeks, I began writing, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence. Not with publication in mind, but simply to make sense of the transformation my life had undergone in the past 18 months. Meanwhile, my relationship with David continued its careful rebuilding. Weekly video calls with Emma became routine, her exuberant 5-year-old personality shining through the screen as she shared kindergarten triumphs and detailed descriptions of her expanding universe. David and Elaine usually appeared briefly. At the beginning and end of these calls, our interactions cordial if still occasionally strained. The Thanksgiving visit they'd promised approached rapidly. I'd extended invitations to Susan and Michael as well, hoping to create new family traditions in my desert home. Susan confirmed immediately, while Michael sent his regrets. His Airstream culinary journey had taken him to New Orleans, where he'd been offered a temporary position at a celebrated restaurant he couldn't refuse. "Next year for sure, Mom," he promised during our call. "Bring everyone to me, and I'll cook a Thanksgiving that will make the food magazines weep with jealousy." In preparation for hosting family in my modest casita, I approached Sophia about using the retreat's community kitchen and dining room for our Thanksgiving meal. "Of course," she agreed readily. "In fact, why not make it an event for everyone? Remaining at the retreat during the holiday? Several of our residents won't be traveling home, and I think they'd welcome inclusion in a family gathering." The suggestion appealed to my librarian's instinct for community building. With Sophia's blessing, I posted a sign-up sheet in the main building, expecting perhaps 5 or 6 additional guests. Within days, 15 people had added their names: visiting authors, staff members without local family, and several elderly patrons from my community literacy program. When I shared this development with David during our next call, his reaction was predictable. "Mom, I thought this was going to be a family Thanksgiving," he said, his brow furrowing with concern. "We were hoping for time to really reconnect, not attend some community potluck." "It's not a potluck," I corrected gently. "It's dinner with my extended family, the people who've become important parts of my daily life here." "But that's not the same as actual family," he persisted. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the progress we'd made. "David, one thing I've learned this past year is that family comes in many forms. The people here have supported me, challenged me, and valued me in ways that have made my transition possible. Including them feels right." He looked ready to argue further, but Elaine appeared behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It sounds lovely, Margaret," she said. "And what a wonderful lesson for Emma about expanding our circle during the holidays." David's expression remained dubious, but he nodded reluctantly. "I guess we'll get to meet all these new people in your life." As the holiday approached, preparations consumed my days. The retreat's chef generously offered to prepare the turkey and major side dishes, while I coordinated contributions from other participants. Susan arrived 3 days early to help, bringing her steady organizational skills and gentle humor to the increasingly complex logistics. "David's going to have a conniption when he sees the guest list," she observed as we arranged place cards on the long community table. 23 people is definitely not his idea of intimate family time. "He'll adjust," I replied, more confidently than I felt. "Or he won't. Either way, this is my life now, and I won't apologize for its fullness." The day before Thanksgiving, David, Elaine, and Emma arrived in a flurry of suitcases and travel fatigue. Emma, undeterred by the long journey, immediately launched into an enthusiastic inspection of my casita, checking whether her Princess Cave reading nook remained as she remembered. "Everything's perfect," she declared, bouncing on the cushions. "Can I sleep here tonight? Please, please, please?" While Emma settled in, David took me aside on the veranda. Mom, I want to talk to you about something important, he began, his tone serious. My heart sank, anticipating criticism of my holiday plans. Instead, he surprised me. I've been thinking about your financial situation, he said, sitting beside me on the small bench. Your pension and Social Security are adequate for now, but what about long-term? Healthcare costs increase dramatically. As we age, and while this retreat position offers housing, it doesn't provide comprehensive benefits. Though his concerns were legitimate, I felt a familiar defensiveness rising. David, I've managed my finances successfully for 47 years. I have savings, supplemental insurance, and my position here includes some healthcare benefits. But is it enough? He pressed. I've been consulting with an elder care financial specialist. He believes you should consider alternatives that would provide more security. The conversation was veering into familiar territory, David attempting to control my future under the guise of concern. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't damage our fragile reconciliation, Elaine appeared at the veranda door. Emma's asking for her grandmother, she said, her tone pointed. And didn't we agree to leave business discussions until after the holiday? David had the grace to look abashed. We did. I'm sorry, Mom. Let's table this until later. Thanksgiving. Morning dawned clear and mild, the desert landscape bathed in golden light. Susan and I rose early, preparing last-minute details before heading to the community kitchen. Emma insisted on joining us, her self-appointed role as decoration supervisor, providing endless entertainment to the kitchen staff. By 4 o'clock, the community dining room had been transformed. Long tables formed a U-shape, decorated with arrangements of native plants, handcrafted centerpieces from my literacy program students, and candles in varying heights. The retreat's chef and his team had outdone themselves, producing a traditional turkey with all the trimmings, supplemented by dishes reflecting the diverse backgrounds of our guests. Tamales from Sophia's family recipe, James's Caribbean spiced, sweet potatoes, Eleanor's southern cornbread dressing. As guests began arriving, I watched David's expression with some trepidation. He stood slightly apart, Elaine beside him, observing the eclectic gathering with poorly concealed surprise. There was Professor Ramirez from the university's anthropology department in animated conversation with Eleanor about prehistoric pottery fragments. James escorted Mrs. Abernathy, a 90-year-old patron of my literacy program who had recently published her first short story. 3 visiting authors, a poet, a mystery novelist, and an environmental writer, chatted with the retreat's groundskeeper about native plant conservation. Emma, unsurprisingly, made herself immediately at home, gravitating toward Mrs. Abernathy with the instinctive recognition of a kindred spirit. "Are you 100 years old?" she asked with 5-year-old directness. "Not quite, dear," Mrs. Abernathy replied with a chuckle. "But I'm working on it." Susan circulated with practiced ease, her natural warmth drawing out shy guests while finding common interests among strangers. I moved between groups, introducing family members to friends, colleagues to relatives, creating bridges between the separate worlds that had defined different chapters of my life. When everyone had arrived, Sophia clinked her glass for attention. "Before we feast, I'd like to welcome you all to our first annual Thanksgiving celebration at the Saguaro Literary Retreat," she announced. This gathering was Margaret's inspiration, bringing together family, friends, colleagues, and community, members in the true spirit of gratitude. "Margaret, would you like to say a few words?" All eyes turned to me, including David's, watchful, uncertain, perhaps concerned I might say something to embarrass him. Instead, I spoke from my heart. Thanksgiving has always been about gathering with those we love, sharing abundance and expressing gratitude. Today, I'm profoundly grateful for the many types of family represented here, the family we're born into. I nodded toward David, Elaine, and Susan. The family we create through our work and shared passions. I gestured to my retreat colleagues. And the family we discover through unexpected connections. My gaze found Mrs. Abernathy, now holding Emma's hand. Thank you all for being part of my journey. Now, let's eat before the chef revokes my kitchen privileges. The laughter that followed broke any remaining tension, and the meal proceeded with the warm chaos of genuine community celebration. I watched, heart full, as David gradually relaxed, finding common ground with Professor Ramirez over environmental engineering innovations. Elaine engaged animatedly with the mystery novelist, apparently a longtime fan of his work. Emma flitted between adults like a social butterfly, collecting stories, compliments, and the occasional treat slipped to her by indulgent new friends. Later, as dessert was being served, an impressive array including pumpkin pie, Eleanor's pecan tart, and a traditional flan from Sophia's family recipe, David sought me out. This isn't what I expected, he admitted quietly, watching Emma charm the environmental writer with detailed descriptions of her kindergarten's recycling program. What did you expect? I asked. He considered the question. Something less vibrant. When you said community Thanksgiving, I pictured a sad collection of lonely people with nowhere else to go. And instead? Instead, I see people who actively choose to be together, who've created connections beyond traditional family structures. He met my eyes directly. Who value what you bring to their lives. The acknowledgement, simple as it was, represented significant evolution in David's understanding of my new life. Thank you for seeing that, I said softly. I'm trying, Mom. I don't always get it right, but I'm trying. The evening concluded with impromptu entertainment, James and two other musicians playing acoustic instruments, the poet reciting a work in progress, and Emma performing a partially remembered song from her school's fall festival, complete with enthusiastic, if inaccurate, hand movements. As guests departed with leftovers and warm embraces, I found myself standing between my worlds, Susan helping Elaine gather Emma's scattered belongings, David deep in conversation with Professor Ramirez about potential collaboration on a water conservation project, retreat staff cheerfully beginning cleanup operations. Quite a success, Sophia commented, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of her excellent port. You've created something special here, Margaret, a new tradition worth continuing. It felt right, I agreed, accepting the fortifying drink gratefully. Bringing everyone together instead of compartmentalizing my relationships. That's what the best homes do, she observed thoughtfully. They expand to accommodate growing connections rather than contracting to exclude differences. Her words resonated deeply, capturing exactly what I'd been attempting to create since leaving my house on Maple Street. Not just a new physical space, but a new way of defining home itself. The remaining days of David's visit proceeded more smoothly than I'd dared hope. The success of the Thanksgiving gathering seemed to have shifted something in his perception of my Arizona life. He expressed genuine interest in my work at the retreat, accompanying me to the library and observing a session of my memoir writing class for seniors. You're different here, he remarked afterward as we walked back to my casita. More authoritative. Somehow? I'm valued for my expertise, I explained. That tends to build confidence. He nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about your financial planning. I realize I approached it all wrong. How so? I was still trying to manage your life rather than support your choices. He looked embarrassed. Old habits. Indeed, I agreed, but without rancor. Very old habits. What I should have asked is whether there's anything you need, any way I could help secure your future on your terms. The distinction was significant, offering assistance rather than imposing solutions. Thank you for that, David. I don't need financial help right now, but I appreciate the offer made in that spirit. Their departure brought the expected mixture of relief and sadness. Emma clung to me at the airport, extracting multiple promises about video calls, summer visits, and my attendance at her kindergarten graduation the following spring. David embraced me with newfound warmth, while Elaine surprised me with a genuine hug rather than her usual restrained farewell. "This trip has been eye-opening," she confided quietly. "Seeing you thrive here, it's changed how I think about aging and independence." As their plane disappeared into the cloudless sky, Susan slipped her arm through mine. "Progress," she declared. "Significant progress." I couldn't disagree. The visit had demonstrated evolution in our family dynamics that I'd scarcely dared hope for 18 months earlier, when I'd handed David that house key and walked away from my old life. Winter in the desert brought new rhythms and pleasures. The retreat hosted its annual literary festival, drawing renowned authors and eager readers from across the country. My expanded role as community outreach director meant coordinating panels, workshops, and community events throughout the week-long celebration of books and ideas. During this busy period, an unexpected communication arrived, an email from the young couple who had purchased my house on Maple Street. "Dear Mrs. Thornton," it began. "We hope this message finds you well. We wanted to share some news that might interest you. While renovating the backyard shed, we discovered a hidden compartment containing what appears to be your late husband's journals and photographs. These items seem quite personal, and we'd like to ensure they're returned to you or your family. Please let us know how we might arrange delivery." The message included several photographs showing leather-bound journals and albums I'd never seen before, apparently concealed in a false wall of the garden shed Richard had built shortly before his final illness. The discovery sent a jolt through me. After 47 years as a widow, I'd believed I knew everything about my husband, had preserved every meaningful memento of our life together. The existence of hidden journals suggested otherwise. I shared the news with Susan during our weekly call. "Hidden journals?" she repeated, sounding as perplexed as I felt. Dad wasn't exactly the secretive type. Why would he hide his writings? "I have no idea," I admitted. "I never even knew he kept journals." After consulting with David and Michael, we arranged for the materials to be shipped to Arizona. The carefully packaged box arrived 2 weeks later, containing 5 journals spanning the 3 years before Richard's death, along with an envelope of photographs I'd never seen. Richard with people I didn't recognize, in places I hadn't known. He'd visited. Opening the first journal felt like an invasion of privacy, even after nearly half a century. Richard's familiar handwriting filled the pages with observations, reflections, and details of daily life I remembered living alongside him. Most entries centered on his devotion to our family, his hopes for our children's futures, his concerns about providing adequately should anything happen to him. But as I continued reading, unexpected revelations emerged. Richard had been exploring a career change in the months before his fatal heart attack, investigating opportunities in architectural design, even taking evening classes I'd known nothing about. He'd harbored dreams of designing sustainable homes, environmentally responsive buildings that worked with rather than against nature. "I don't want to worry Margaret with speculative plans," he wrote in one entry. "She has enough concerns managing the household and children. Better to wait until I have something concrete to show for these explorations." The discovery of this hidden aspect of Richard's inner life affected me profoundly. I'd preserved him, in my memory as the practical engineer, the devoted family man, the reliable provider. These journals revealed dimensions I'd never glimpsed. His artistic aspirations, his philosophical musings, his secret worries that the traditional path he'd chosen might not fulfill his deeper creative impulses. I found myself grieving anew, not just for Richard's early death, but for the parts of him I'd never fully known or appreciated during our 15 years together. How much of his true self had remained concealed, even within a loving marriage? How many aspects of my husband had I failed to see because I'd been too busy, too preoccupied, or simply too accustomed to viewing him through a limited lens? These questions consumed me during the quiet winter evenings. I brought the journals to my memoir writing class, not to share their private contents, but to discuss the broader questions they raised about how well we truly know even those closest to us. "We create simplified versions of the people we love," observed Mrs. Abernathy, her 90 years lending weight to her insights. "It's more manageable that way. The full complexity of another human being is almost impossible to comprehend, even after decades together." "But isn't that tragic?" asked another class member, a retired postal worker in his 60s. "To never be fully known, even by those who love us most?" "Perhaps," Eleanor interjected from her usual seat near the window. "Or perhaps it's what makes human connection so endlessly fascinating. We're always discovering new facets, even in relationships we thought were fully mapped." The conversation continued circling these philosophical questions, while my personal reckoning with Richard's journals took a more concrete turn. I found myself wondering how my own children perceived me. What simplified version of mom existed in their minds that might bear only partial resemblance to my complete self? Had David's attempts to control my aging process stemmed partly from never having known me as anything but his mother? Had my widow identity so thoroughly defined me that my children couldn't imagine me creating a life centered on my own needs and interests? I shared these reflections with Susan during her spring visit. She listened thoughtfully as we hiked a gentle trail in the foothills near the retreat. "I think there's truth in that," she acknowledged, helping me over a rocky section. "We all had our fixed image of you, the self-sacrificing mother, the diligent provider, the person who always put everyone else first. When you suddenly prioritized yourself by moving to Arizona, it shattered that simplistic picture. For David especially," I noted. "David needed you to be contained within his understanding. Your transformation threatened not just his plans for your care, but his entire concept of who you are." She smiled wryly. "Some people find others' complexity threatening rather than fascinating." Meanwhile, Richard's journals had sparked another, unexpected development. Among his architectural sketches were designs for desert-adapted housing, passive cooling systems, water conservation features, and solar alignments that maximized natural light while minimizing heat gain. During a retreat function, I'd mentioned these concepts to an environmental architecture professor from the university who expressed immediate interest. "These ideas were progressive for their time," she explained after reviewing copies of Richard's drawings. "Some principles we're only now implementing in sustainable desert construction. May I share these with my students as historical examples of forward-thinking design?" Richard's hidden creative work found new life in university classrooms, inspiring architecture students nearly 50 years after his death. The professor invited me to speak about Richard's vision, putting me in the strange position of interpreting work I'd only recently discovered myself. "I can't claim to be an expert on my husband's architectural philosophy," I admitted to the class of eager young designers. "In fact, I didn't know these drawings existed until a few months ago. But I can tell you about the man whose mind created them, his character, his values, his way of observing the world with both precision and wonder." This experience, finding previously unknown dimensions of Richard to share with the world, brought unexpected healing. Rather than diminishing our marriage by highlighting what I hadn't known, it expanded my appreciation for the complex person I'd loved, the layers he'd contained that life had never given him time to fully express. I shared this perspective with David during our monthly video call. "I've been thinking about how we reduce people to simple versions in our minds," I explained. "How we sometimes resist the evidence that they're more complex than we've allowed for." He looked thoughtful, bouncing Emma on his knee as she colored, ostensibly participating in our call, but mostly absorbed in her artistic efforts. "Like how I reduced you to just being my mother, needing my protection?" The insight surprised me. "Exactly like that. I've been talking about this in therapy," he admitted. "How I never developed the ability to see you as a complete person with needs and interests separate from your role in my life. It wasn't fair to you." This conversation marked another milestone in our evolving relationship. For perhaps the first time, David was acknowledging me not just as his mother, but as a woman with my own legitimate journey, my own right to self-determination. Spring brought a flurry of activity to the retreat. My literacy program expanded to include a bookmobile service to outlying communities, funded by a grant I'd written with Sophia's guidance. The memoir writing class culminated in a public reading event that filled the retreat's largest meeting space. Eleanor and I collaborated on a documentary photography project capturing the stories of the region's oldest residents. Amid these professional satisfactions, I continued exploring Richard's journals, gradually integrating this new information into my understanding of our shared past. I wrote to the young couple on Maple Street, thanking them for their care in preserving and returning these precious materials. They responded with photographs of the renovations they'd completed, including the nursery for their second child, now painted a cheerful yellow and filled with books, many from the collection I'd left behind. "Your house has become our home," they wrote, "but we find traces of your family's love in unexpected places. The height markings on the kitchen doorframe, the handprints in the garden stepping stones, the initials carved into the oak tree. We're honored to be the next chapter in this home story." Their message brought tears rather than regret. The house on Maple Street would always be part of my history, but it no longer defined my future. That belonged to the life I was building in the desert, a life that continued expanding in ways I'd never anticipated at 70. Emma's kindergarten graduation brought me back to Boston in late May. David and Elaine insisted I stay with them, rather than at a hotel, a gesture of inclusion that felt significant. Their home, which I'd only seen in photographs and video calls, reflected Elaine's professional success and David's engineering precision, modern, immaculate, and designed. For impression rather than comfort, Emma's room provided the exception, a riot of color, creativity, and childhood exuberance. "Grandma, I made this space just like my princess cave at your house," she announced, showing me the reading nook she'd created with pillows, stuffed animals, and a canopy fashioned from scarves in a remarkable imitation of the space I'd designed for her in Arizona. The graduation ceremony itself, elaborate for 5-year-olds transitioning to first grade, brought unexpected emotion. Watching Emma in her miniature cap and gown, confidently reciting her line in the class poem, I found myself reflecting on the parallel journeys of growing up and growing older, both requiring courage to move beyond comfortable limitations toward unknown possibilities. During this visit, I noticed subtle shifts in David and Elaine's dynamic. She spoke more assertively, he listened more attentively. Their shared parenting seemed more balanced than I'd previously observed, with David handling equal portions of the childcare responsibilities that once would have fallen primarily to Elaine despite her demanding career. On my final evening, after Emma had been tucked in with multiple bedtime stories, David joined me on their rooftop terrace overlooking the Boston skyline. "I've been meaning to say something," he began, handing me a glass of wine. "I think I understand now why you had to leave so dramatically. Why just saying no to my plans for you wasn't enough." I sipped my wine, waiting for him to continue. "You needed to shatter my perception completely," he said. "If you'd stayed and just refused the retirement community, I would have kept trying different approaches to manage your aging. You had to break the entire pattern by doing something I couldn't control at all." The insight was surprisingly accurate. "I didn't consciously plan it that way," I admitted. "But yes, I think that's true. Half measures wouldn't have established the boundary I needed." "The key was a nice touch," he added with a rueful smile. "Symbolic." "Dramatic," I acknowledged. "Effective," he concluded. We watched the city lights in companionable silence. The anger that had fueled our conflict had transformed into something more nuanced, a mutual recognition of past mistakes alongside genuine appreciation for our ongoing efforts to rebuild. "I'm proud of you, Mom," David said finally. "Not in that condescending way I used to be. Proud of how well you're managing. But genuinely impressed by the life you've created, the impact you're having on your community, the way you've redefined what's possible in your 70s. Coming from David, this represented revolutionary progress. I reached over to squeeze his hand, words temporarily beyond my capacity. Returning to Arizona after this successful visit, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. The woman who had clutched a house deed while her son suggested she sleep in the garage had acted from a place of hurt and defensive self-protection. The woman who now directed community programs, mentored aspiring writers, and continued expanding her understanding of herself and others, operated from confidence and self-knowledge that grew stronger with each passing month. In July, an unexpected opportunity arose. A publishing representative attending the retreat's summer writing program approached me after hearing about my memoir writing class for seniors. "There's growing interest in authentic stories of reinvention later in life," she explained over coffee on my veranda. "Your own experience, combined with your work collecting others' stories, could make a compelling book. Would you consider developing a proposal?" The suggestion both flattered and intimidated me. "I'm not a professional writer," I protested. "Just a librarian who's lived an unexpectedly interesting third act." "Those are often the most powerful voices," she countered. "People who never expected to share their stories but discovered they had something meaningful to say." I promised to consider the idea, turning to my leather-bound journal that evening to explore my thoughts. Did I have something meaningful to offer beyond my personal experience? Had my journey from dismissed mother to respected community leader revealed insights worth sharing more broadly? The questions themselves revealed how profoundly my self-perception had evolved. 2 years earlier, I couldn't have imagined anyone valuing my perspective enough to suggest publishing it. Now, the possibility seemed worth serious consideration. As summer's heat built toward its August crescendo, I found myself returning to a metaphor Sophia had used during one of our early conversations. "Desert plants don't merely survive harsh conditions," she'd observed. "They develop specialized adaptations that allow them to thrive precisely because of those challenges. The difficulties actually catalyze their most remarkable features." Perhaps that described my own transformation. The painful suggestion that I belonged in the garage, marginalized, diminished, stored away like outdated equipment, had catalyzed my most remarkable reinvention. In responding to that hurt with courage rather than capitulation, I discovered capacities I might never have recognized had my life proceeded along more comfortable lines. As my 73rd birthday approached, Susan, Michael, and surprisingly David collaborated on a special celebration. They arranged a weekend gathering at the retreat, bringing together my Arizona community and family connections. Michael took over the kitchen, preparing a multicultural feast reflecting culinary techniques gathered during his Airstream journey. Susan coordinated a memory book collecting stories and photographs from different chapters of my life. David's contribution proved most unexpected. He'd commissioned an architect to create a small reading pavilion for the retreat grounds, inspired by Richard's sustainable design concepts documented in those hidden journals. "I wanted to honor both your parents," he explained as we stood together at the pavilion's dedication ceremony. "Dad's creative vision that never had the chance to develop, and your courage in rewriting the script of what later life can encompass. The simple structure, a circular space with built-in benches, strategic shade elements, and clever natural ventilation, became an immediate favorite among retreat residents. A small plaque acknowledged both Richard's inspiration and my ongoing contributions to the retreat community. That evening, surrounded by the people who had supported, challenged, and valued me through various life stages, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a painful suggestion and a symbolic key. "I've been asked to write a book," I announced to my assembled family as we enjoyed Michael's spectacular dessert creation on the retreat's main patio. About reinvention after 70, about refusing to be diminished by others' limited perceptions. You absolutely should, Susan enthused immediately. I'd read it, Michael agreed, serving another portion of his chocolate masterpiece to an appreciative Eleanor. David considered the idea more carefully, in his characteristically analytical fashion. It could help others facing similar crossroads, he said finally. Not just seniors, but anyone needing to break free from how others define them. Emma, now 6 and thoroughly integrated into the retreat community during her summer visit, looked up from her dessert. Will it have pictures? Books need pictures, Grandma. Perhaps it will, I laughed, tousling her hair. Pictures of a woman, discovering that life's most surprising chapter might begin at exactly the moment others expect her story to conclude. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down, and my family had returned to their respective accommodations, I sat, alone on my veranda under the vast desert sky. The woman who had once clutched a property deed while hearing she should sleep among garden tools now held the threads of a rich, self-determined life. Meaningful work, authentic relationships, creative engagement, and family connections transformed. Through hard-earned mutual respect. The key I'd handed David that day on the porch of my old house had indeed unlocked something, though not what either of us had anticipated. For him, it had eventually opened the door to seeing me as a complete person beyond my maternal role. For me, it had unlocked the courage to define home not as a physical structure containing family obligations, but as the space where I could fully become myself, complicated, evolving, and endlessly capable of growth. Sometimes the most painful dismissals contain unexpected gifts. The son who said I should stay in the garage gave me, however unintentionally, the final push I needed to discover that at 70, my best contributions to the world weren't behind me, but waiting to be developed through the courage to begin, again, and for that, I remain paradoxically grateful. The writing project that began in Sophia's leather-bound journal evolved over the following months into something more structured and purposeful. With encouragement from the publisher I'd met at the retreat, I developed a book proposal combining my personal journey with insights gathered from my senior memoir writing class participants. The working title, The Garage Key, Finding Dignity. And Purpose After 70. Captured both the literal moment that had catalyzed my transformation and the metaphorical unlocking of possibilities that followed. To my astonishment, 3 publishing houses expressed interest. After careful consideration, I signed with a mid-sized publisher specializing in memoirs and self-development books. Their editorial approach emphasized authentic voices and social relevance, aligning perfectly with my vision for the project. We believe your story will resonate with thousands of older adults facing similar crossroads, my editor Catherine explained during our first video call. The population over 65 is growing rapidly, and cultural narratives about aging need radical revision. The contractual advance, though modest, brought unexpected financial freedom. I established a small foundation in partnership with the retreat, creating scholarship opportunities for older adults pursuing creative and educational endeavors. The Margaret Thornton Second Chapter grants would provide funding for seniors embarking on new ventures, art studies, entrepreneurial projects, community initiatives, after age 65. This development captured Michael's imagination immediately. "Mom, this is exactly what you needed when you moved to Arizona," he pointed out during one of our calls. "Seed money for reinvention without financial anxiety." "Exactly," I agreed. "The transition period is where many people falter, having the vision but lacking the financial bridge to reach it." As the book progressed from proposal to manuscript, I spent mornings writing at my small desk overlooking the desert garden. Afternoons remained dedicated to my retreat responsibilities, which now included mentoring interns from the university's library science program. Evenings often found me video chatting with family or enjoying the company of my expanding circle of friends. Emma, now in first grade, requested weekly writing dates where we would connect via video call, each working on our respective projects. My book and her illustrated stories about a time-traveling librarian who solved historical mysteries with the help of famous authors. The coincidental similarity to my own career delighted us both, though Emma insisted her protagonist's adventures were much more dangerous than my own. "Grandma," she asked during one such session, her face serious beyond her 7 years, "did it hurt your feelings when Daddy said you should stay in the garage? I think that would hurt my feelings a lot." The question, delivered with a child's perfect blend of innocence and insight, caught me off guard. David and I had never directly discussed whether Emma understood the catalyst for my Arizona relocation. "Yes, sweetheart, it did hurt my feelings," I answered honestly. "Very much. Then why didn't you cry or yell? That's what I do when my feelings get hurt." I considered how to frame my response appropriately for her age while maintaining truthfulness. Sometimes when grown-ups get their feelings hurt very badly, they don't cry or yell. Instead, they make big decisions to protect themselves and create something better. She nodded, processing this information. "Like when you decided to live in Arizona with the books and cactuses instead of in the garage with the garden tools. Exactly like that." "I'm glad you didn't stay in the garage," she declared firmly. "You wouldn't fit with all your books anyway." The simplicity of her perspective made me laugh, though it contained profound truth. I wouldn't have fit in the diminished space allotted to me, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. Later, that week, I mentioned this conversation to David during our monthly call. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling into rueful acknowledgement. "She asked me about it too," he admitted. "Why I thought Grandma should sleep in the garage. It was uncomfortable." "What did you tell her?" I asked, curious about his perspective on our history. "The truth, more or less. That I made a mistake, that I hurt you without fully understanding what I was doing, and that you made a brave choice that ultimately made everyone's lives better." He ran a hand through his hair, still that gesture so like his father's. "She wanted to know if I'd apologized. I realized I never had, not directly." The moment hung between us, an acknowledgement of the missing piece in our reconciliation. I'm sorry, Mom," he said finally, meeting my eyes through the screen. "Not just for suggesting the garage, but for all of it. Treating you as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected, dismissing your preferences, trying to control your future. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." The apology, delivered without qualification or defense, washed through me with unexpected power. Some fundamental tension I'd been carrying released, like a muscle finally relaxing after years of contraction. "Thank you," I said simply. "That matters to me." "It should have come sooner," he acknowledged. "Emma's clearer on right and wrong than I was." The conversation marked another evolution in our healing relationship, moving from polite accommodation to genuine reckoning with past wounds. The pattern continued over the following months as my book took shape, requiring me to revisit and articulate painful moments that had previously remained partially processed. Catherine, my editor, pushed me to explore not just what had happened, but the deeper currents that had made it possible: the cultural devaluation of aging women, the psychological dynamics of parent-child relationships in later life, the economic vulnerabilities that often constrain older adults' choices. "Your story isn't just about one insensitive suggestion," she observed during an editorial call. "It's about the entire system that made that suggestion seem reasonable to your son, that made your autonomy appear optional rather than fundamental." This broader perspective informed the final shape of the manuscript. Beyond my personal narrative, the book incorporated research on ageism, interviews with geriatric specialists and elder rights advocates, and stories from other seniors who had created vibrant third acts despite societal expectations of diminishment. As the publication date approached, marketing plans included a modest book tour focused on libraries, senior centers, and community organizations throughout the Southwest. I approached these commitments with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I'd never considered public speaking among my talents. Sophia, characteristically direct, dismissed my concerns. "You've been presenting to groups at the retreat for 3 years. This is the same thing, just with a microphone and better lighting." My 74th birthday coincided with the final manuscript submission, a synchronicity that felt appropriate. 3 years had passed since that moment in my Maple Street home, when my son's suggestion about the garage had crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate, that I was being incrementally erased, my personhood gradually reduced, to a logistical consideration in others' lives. To mark both occasions, my Arizona community organized a sunset celebration on the retreat's main patio. Sophia presented me with a first-edition Zora Neale Hurston novel for the library's special collection. Eleanor contributed a magnificent cake decorated with an edible image of my book cover. James and the retreat's musical residents performed a custom composition titled The Librarian's Liberation, slightly off-key but heartfelt. More moving still were the virtual greetings from family members unable to attend in person. Susan sent a beautiful video compiling well wishes from former library colleagues and neighborhood friends. Michael contributed a spectacular culinary creation delivered by overnight shipping, a chocolate sculpture resembling a keyring with a fondant key. David, Elaine, and Emma's video message showed them seated in their living room, Emma bouncing with barely contained excitement. "Happy birthday, Mom," David began. "We're enormously proud of both your milestone and the book completion. But we have something more significant to share." He glanced at Elaine, who nodded encouragingly. "We've made a decision," he continued. "I've accepted a position with the Southwestern Environmental Engineering Institute beginning in January. We're moving to Arizona." My breath caught as Emma broke in, unable to contain herself any longer. "We're going to live near you, Grandma. Not in your house because that would be weird since you have your own special casita, but close enough that I can come see you without an airplane." The news left me momentarily speechless. After 3 years of cross-country separation, with visits, limited by distance and expense, my son's family would be relocating within driving distance of the retreat. "What about your position in Boston?" I finally managed. "It was time for a change," David explained. "The Institute is doing groundbreaking work on water conservation technologies, and frankly, the Boston winters were getting harder each year." He smiled slightly. "Besides, Emma has been campaigning relentlessly for more grandma time since our last visit." Elaine added, "We've found a house in Mesa, about 40 minutes from the retreat. Close enough for regular visits, but not so close. We'll intrude on your established life." The thoughtfulness of this qualifier, acknowledging my need for continued independence, demonstrated how profoundly our family dynamic had evolved since that painful confrontation 3 years earlier. After the call ended, I sat with this development, allowing the complex emotions to surface. Joy at the prospect of regular contact with Emma, gratitude for the consideration shown in their housing choice, and a small but undeniable apprehension: would proximity resurrect David's controlling tendencies? Would my hard-won autonomy face new challenges? I shared these concerns with Susan during our next conversation. "It's natural to worry," she acknowledged. "But remember how far you've all come. David isn't the same person who suggested the garage. You're not the same person who needed to escape. The relationship has transformed on both sides." "True," I agreed. "But old patterns can resurface in familiar interactions." "Then you'll handle it," she said confidently. "The Margaret who wrote a book and established a foundation isn't going to suddenly lose her voice just because her son lives in the same state." Her faith in my resilience proved well-founded as the months passed. David and family completed their relocation shortly after the new year. Their house in Mesa, a sustainable design incorporating many principles from Richard's journals, reflected their commitment to integrating thoughtfully into the southwestern environment. The proximity brought expected joys: Sunday dinners once or twice monthly, Emma's impromptu visits with Elaine for library story hours, shared holidays without the stress of cross-country travel. But more meaningful was the continued growth in our relationships. David approached his new geographic closeness with careful respect for boundaries, invitations rather than assumptions, offers of assistance without insistence, updates about their lives without expectations about mine. The patterns established during our years of long-distance reconciliation transitioned surprisingly well to more frequent contact. The book release in April brought my story full circle in unexpected ways. The regional publisher had planned a modest launch, but the topic struck a chord with media outlets focused on aging populations and family dynamics. I found myself interviewed for public radio programs, featured in senior-focused magazines, and invited to speak at conferences on aging and elder care. "You've tapped into something profound," Catherine observed as sales exceeded initial projections. "This isn't just about one mother-son relationship. It's about the conversation our society needs regarding dignity and autonomy in later life." The most gratifying responses came from readers in situations similar to what I'd faced. Letters, emails, and comments at book events shared stories of erasure, infantilization, and the struggle to maintain selfhood when others began viewing age as synonymous with incapacity. "I gave your book to my daughter," wrote one 80-year-old reader. After reading it, she apologized for trying to move me into assisted living against my wishes. "We're now exploring aging-in-place options that address her concerns while respecting my autonomy." Another wrote, "At 68, I felt pressured to retire and make room for younger people, despite my continued effectiveness and passion for my work. Your story gave me courage to push back. I'm now transitioning to a consulting role that values my experience while allowing more flexibility." The book's success brought financial security I hadn't anticipated. Royalties, speaking fees, and a modest advance for a second book focused specifically on creative reinvention after 70 provided resources to expand the Foundation's grant program. Within 18 months, we'd funded 32 projects by seniors pursuing everything from documentary filmmaking to community garden initiatives. This work brought me into contact with aging specialists, policy advocates, and researchers examining how cultural attitudes toward aging impact health and longevity. I was invited to participate in a university study examining the cognitive and emotional benefits of purposeful engagement in later life. Our memoir writing program became a case study in a national report on arts-based interventions for senior well-being. As these professional opportunities expanded, my position at the retreat evolved accordingly. Sophia created a new role, elder scholar in residence, allowing me to reduce administrative responsibilities while continuing community programming and special projects. The adjustment provided time for writing, speaking engagements, and foundation development without sacrificing my home base at the retreat. Through these developments, my relationship with David continued its careful rebuilding. His position at the Environmental Institute proved fulfilling professionally, involving collaboration with university researchers on desert water conservation technologies. He occasionally mentioned Richard's journals, finding surprising resonance between his father's early ideas and current sustainable design principles. "I wish I'd known this side of Dad," he reflected during one of our conversations. "His creative thinking, his environmental consciousness. I only remember the practical engineer, the problem solver." We often see simplified versions of the people closest to us, I observed, echoing insights from my memoir class discussions. "It's almost impossible to comprehend all the dimensions of another person, even those we love most. Like how I reduced you to just mom," he acknowledged, "missing all the other aspects of who you are." Such conversations, impossible during our earlier estrangement, demonstrated the profound shift in our relationship. We were learning to see each other as complete people, complex, evolving, containing multitudes beyond our family roles. Emma, now 8 and flourishing in her Arizona. School proved the unexpected bridge in our family's healing. Her regular presence at the retreat, for library programs, weekend visits, and special events, wove natural connections between my professional community and family life. She proudly introduced me to school friends during field trips, declaring, with proprietary satisfaction, "That's my grandma. She wrote a book and runs this whole library." Her relationship with the other retreat elders expanded her understanding of aging beyond limited stereotypes. She discussed archaeology with Eleanor, learned basic guitar chords from James, and persuaded Sophia to judge her class science fair. Through these interactions, she absorbed a vision of later life characterized by engagement, creativity, and continued growth, rather than decline and dependency. On the second anniversary of the book's publication, I received an unexpected communication, an email from the young couple who had purchased my house on Maple Street, containing photographs of their children playing in the backyard Richard had designed decades earlier. "We thought you might enjoy seeing how the space continues evolving," they wrote. "Our oldest daughter is using the workshop shed as her invention laboratory. She found your husband's old drafting tools in a cabinet and has been creating her own architectural designs, though they mostly involve elaborate tree houses and fairy palaces at this point." The image of a young girl discovering creative tools in the same space where Richard had hidden his journals felt like cosmic symmetry, creativity flowing through physical spaces across generations, connecting strangers through shared experience of place. I shared the photos with David during our next family dinner, watching his expression soften as he recognized the workshop where he and his father had built birdhouses and science fair projects. "Life continuing in circles," he observed, quietly. The conversation turned to legacy, what we leave behind, how it transforms in others' hands, what persists beyond our direct influence. David mentioned a memory garden he was designing for the Institute's grounds, incorporating native plants and sustainable water features. Elaine described a mentorship program she was establishing at her new law firm, specifically supporting women re-entering the workforce after caregiving interruptions. As they talked, I recognized how my choice 3 years earlier had rippled through our family system, catalyzing reconsiderations and realignments far beyond my individual experience. By refusing diminishment, I had inadvertently created space for everyone to examine assumptions, adjust perspectives, and grow into more authentic versions of themselves. Later that evening, after David's family had departed and I sat alone on my veranda watching the desert sunset, I reflected on the journey from that painful moment in my Maple Street home to this peaceful Arizona evening. The woman who had clutched a property deed while hearing she should sleep in the garage had acted from wounded dignity, uncertain what awaited beyond familiar constraints, but knowing she could not accept the space assigned to her. The woman who now sat surrounded by evidence of a vibrant third act, professional respect, creative fulfillment, meaningful relationships, and financial security, had discovered that courage often yields rewards beyond initial imagination. By refusing to shrink into the background of others' lives, I had expanded not just my own possibilities, but perhaps helped shift cultural narratives about what aging can encompass. My 75th birthday approached with none of the dread that milestone birthdays often inspire. Each year beyond 70 had brought unexpected gifts, new skills developed, new connections formed, new aspects of myself discovered. Age had become less about numerical accumulation and more about continuing evolution. The second chapter foundation prepared for its annual grant ceremony, now a significant event in the regional arts calendar. This year's recipients included a 72-year-old former accountant pursuing documentary filmmaking, an 80-year-old launching a multilingual storytelling program in underserved communities, and a 68-year-old establishing a technology training center specifically designed for senior learning styles. As I reviewed their applications, I recognized a common thread. Each had faced some version of the garage moment, when others' limited expectations threatened to confine them to smaller lives than they envisioned for themselves. Each had found the courage to claim bigger spaces, to insist on continued growth despite societal messages about appropriate ambitions for their age. The foundation had recently partnered with a healthcare research institute studying connections between purposeful engagement and cognitive health in aging populations. Preliminary findings suggested that meaningful creative and intellectual pursuits correlated with lower rates of cognitive decline and improved quality of life measures. Our grant recipients would participate in longitudinal studies tracking these outcomes, potentially influencing healthcare approaches to aging. Such developments demonstrated how personal acts of resistance could contribute to broader systemic change. How one woman's refusal to sleep in the garage might eventually help reshape cultural understandings of aging's possibilities. On my 75th birthday, the retreat organized a special celebration combining personal milestone with the Foundation's grant ceremony. Family, colleagues, friends, and community members gathered in the retreat's main hall, transformed for the occasion with desert flower arrangements and photography exhibits featuring grant recipients' work. David surprised me with a specially commissioned bench for the reading pavilion, inscribed with a quote from my book. "Dignity isn't something others bestow or withhold. It's an internal flame we either allow others to diminish or learn to fuel ourselves." Susan contributed a beautiful quilt incorporating fabric from significant moments throughout my life. A patch from Richard's favorite shirt, material from the children's baby blankets, pieces from my librarian cardigans, and swatches representing my Arizona chapter. Michael, now executive chef at an acclaimed restaurant in Santa Fe, created a multi-course meal reflecting my life journey. Midwestern comfort foods reimagined with Southwestern influences, creating bridges between past and present, tradition and innovation. Emma, sporting a future librarian t-shirt she'd designed herself, presented me with a handmade book containing illustrated stories about our adventures together, real and imagined. The final page showed a drawing of a key with the caption, "Sometimes the most important door is the one you unlock yourself." As I looked around at the gathering, diverse in age, background, and connection to my journey, I felt profound gratitude for this unexpected chapter of life. The painful suggestion that had catalyzed my departure from Maple Street had ultimately opened pathways to a fuller existence than I could have imagined while living within the constraints of others' expectations. After the formalities concluded, and conversations flowed freely around the hall, I found a moment of quiet on the veranda. David joined me there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Remember when I wanted you to move into that retirement community in Boston?" he asked, handing me a glass. "All those glossy brochures about appropriate senior living?" "Vividly," I replied dry. "They featured suspiciously energetic white-haired people playing golf and doing water aerobics." He laughed. "God, I was insufferable. So certain I knew what was best for you." "You were operating from genuine concern," I acknowledged. "Just filtered through some problematic assumptions about aging." "Well, here's to your better vision," he said, raising his glass. "To garage keys and second acts. And to learning to see each other more completely," I added. We clinked glasses as the desert sunset painted the mountains in spectacular color. The journey from that confrontation in my Maple Street home to this peaceful moment beside my son contained multitudes: pain and healing, separation and reconnection, ending and beginning. The garage key I'd handed him that day had indeed unlocked something unexpected. Not just my liberation from others' limiting expectations, but a pathway for everyone in my orbit to reconsider assumptions about what aging can encompass. The mother who refused diminishment had offered her son an unexpected gift: the opportunity to evolve his understanding, to develop greater empathy, to become more fully himself through recognizing others' wholeness. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast desert sky, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The woman who had once been told she belonged in the garage among stored-away things had instead claimed her place among the stars, visible, luminous, casting light that might guide others exploring similar territories. Sometimes the most painful moments contain unexpected invitations. The suggestion that most deeply wounded me had ultimately propelled me toward my most authentic life. By refusing the garage, I had discovered rooms within myself I'd never fully explored: creativity, advocacy, leadership, vision. As I prepare to enter my 76th year, I carry this central truth. Our worth isn't determined by others' assessments. Our potential isn't limited by societal expectations, and our stories don't conclude when others assume the narrative has ended. The key to the garage turned out to be the key to everything that followed. All the doors that opened when I refused to accept the diminished space assigned to me and insisted instead on room to continue becoming. And that, perhaps, is the most important key of all.